Welcome to If I Could Say One More Thing, a podcast where stories explore the words left unspoken, the moments that linger, and the connections that shape us, whether we realize it or not. Through fiction, we step into those in-between spaces where the past meets the present and where the what-ifs still whisper in the background. In today's episode, we step into the mind of Nicole, a woman who once shared an undeniable connection with someone she never met. A year of conversations, laughter, and unspoken possibilities, all leading to a meeting that never happened. But why? Was it fear, fate, or simply the nature of things that are meant to stay in the realm of almost? This is a story about timing, about the blurry spaces between clarity and hesitation, and about what we choose to hold on to, even when life doesn't unfold the way we expect. Let's begin. The first message arrived on a Thursday. It was a perfectly ordinary, nonchalant opening line. Something about her profile making him laugh, which, considering how unfunny she considered herself, was already suspicious. Still, she responded. One message turned into 10, 10 turned into 100, and suddenly she was spending her lunch breaks and late nights exchanging wit-laden texts with a man she had never met. For a month, the banter was relentless, electric even. They told each other stories, shared music recommendations, made fun of the absurd of dating apps while fully engaging in the absurdity themselves. She was in Italy and he was in the UK, and while she knew long distance was a logistical nightmare, something about their connection made it feel less so. Then, almost as suddenly as it had started, he put the brakes on. "I've been thinking," he texted one evening. "I really like talking to you, but I think we should just be friends." She blinked at the screen. They hadn't even met, hadn't even seen if they'd be repelled by each other's real-life mannerisms or eating habits. And yet, he was already calling it. She asked why, of course, because she was a rational human being and not a psychic. He gave some vague answer about logistics, timing, and how he'd been burned before. He didn't want to ruin what they had by hoping for something more. She should have told him that was nonsense. That what they had was just the digital equivalent of two people sitting on a bench feeding pigeons. But instead, she agreed. If he wanted to be friends, fine. For 9 months, their relationship persisted. Birthday messages, check-ins before big work presentations, a good luck here and I hope you're doing well there. He remained in her life like an old favorite sweater, something comfortable, occasionally worn, but never front and center. She figured he was lonely. She was at times entertained. Then, on the eve of New Year's, a message appeared. "Happy New Year! Maybe this will be the year we finally meet." She stared at the words, amused. He had put them in the friend zone before they even got off the runway, yet here he was, suddenly alluding to a real-life encounter. Still, she humored him. "We should definitely organize a meetup," she replied, knowing full well that organizing had never been their strong suit. For months, neither of them mentioned it, until, a few weeks before their so-called friendship anniversary, he finally brought it up. They settled on Barcelona. Neutral ground, easy flights. They picked a date. The moment she booked her tickets, doubts crept in. Did she really know this person? Besides a few phone calls, their entire relationship had unfolded through a screen. She had pictures of him, sure, but for all she knew, he was either exceptionally good at angles or had been using photos of a Norwegian fashion model named Lars. And then there was the underlying question. Why now? Why after a year did he want to meet? She arrived in Barcelona with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She had this feeling, one she couldn't shake, that he might not show up. He had always seemed torn, as though his own thoughts were constantly battling for dominance. There was a part of him that wanted connection and another part that was terrified of it. But then, there he was. She spotted him before he saw her, leaning against a cafe wall, hands shoved in his pockets, looking both casual and deeply uncomfortable, as if he had accidentally wandered into his own surprise party. She approached, heart pounding in that ridiculous way that only happens when you're about to meet someone who has existed primarily in your phone. "Hello, stranger," she said. He turned, his face breaking into something that resembled both relief and panic. "You came," he said, as if she was the one with the history of ghosting. "So did you," she countered. They stood there, staring, absorbing. "Should we, sit?" he finally asked, motioning towards the cafe. She nodded, and they slid into a corner table. He looked like his pictures, which was a relief. His voice, though, was new, familiar yet unfamiliar, like hearing a song you knew all the words to but had never actually listened to before. They ordered coffee, and for a while the conversation felt a bit like shaking off rust. Then slowly it found its rhythm. The same humor, the same rapport. It was all still there. "So," she said after a while, "why did you decide to meet now, after a year?" He exhaled, eyes flickering towards the table. "I don't know. I guess I just didn't want to wonder anymore." She arched an eyebrow. "And what exactly were you wondering?" He hesitated. "If I had made a mistake, pushing you into the friend zone so quickly." She tilted her head, studying him. "And?" A smile ghosted across his lips. "I think I probably did." She took a sip of her coffee, letting the words settle between them. "And if you hadn't come?" she asked. He sighed, running a hand through his hair as if trying to smooth out the tangled thoughts in his head. "Then it would have been because I convinced myself it was easier to keep things blurry. When things are blurry, they can be anything. Potentially good, possibly great, but never disastrous. I've spent a long time making my life something I can control, something predictable. The idea of introducing someone that could change that. It's appealing, sure, but also terrifying, because what if it doesn't work? What if it ends up being painful? What if I end up being the guy who ruins a good thing again? So yeah, maybe I would have stayed away just to keep things safely undefined. She nodded. She understood. People were fragile, men especially. They carried their wounds in silence, masking their doubts with nonchalance, and held themselves to standards they would never impose on anyone else. They could be so hard, so unforgiving towards their own missteps, punishing themselves in ways no one else ever would. She had seen it before, recognized it in him now, the quiet self-doubt, the fear of ruining something before it even had a chance to begin. And yet, here he was, stepping into the unknown anyway. "Well," she said, leaning back in her chair, "I guess now we're in high definition." He chuckled. "Guess so." They spent the rest of the afternoon wandering through Barcelona. They got lost in the Gothic quarter, sampled tapas, and talked, really talked. And by the time the evening rolled around, she knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, the blur was gone. And that, she decided, was enough. And that brings us to the end. But before we wrap up, I had the chance to speak with Nicole, the real-life inspiration behind this story. For privacy reasons, names have been changed, but her thoughts and reflections are very much her own. In our conversation, we explore what it was like to navigate this connection, what she saw beyond the blur, and whether time has given her a different perspective on the man who never showed up. Let's dive in. So, looking back, do you think the blurry man, let's just call him like that, okay? Do you think he was ever truly capable of stepping out of his comfort zone? Or do you think you feel he was always destined to keep things safely undefined?
I think he wanted to, but wanting and doing are two different things. There's always this push and pull with him, the desire to connect and the fear of what connection can mean. If he ever did step out of his comfort zone, I imagine it would have been in small, controlled ways, nothing too predictable. But sometimes, as real and tangible as meeting in person, that would have shattered the illusion of safety he built around himself. So no, I don't think he was destined to stay blurry. But I do think it was the path of least resistance for him. And, people tend to take the easier path when fear is involved.
You likely sensed his struggles early on, his insecurities, his fears, his loneliness. Did hearing this story help you see him in an even more human light? Or did it simply confirm what you already knew?
A little of both. I always knew he was struggling with something, even if he never said it outright. It was, in the way he joked about things that weren't really jokes. The way he'd disappear and then return as if no time had passed. And the way he put me in the friend zone before anything could even happen, as if preemptively protecting himself from something that hadn't even had the chance to fail.
Mm-hmm.
But hearing this story made me sit with it longer. Maybe really consider what was going on beneath the surface. It helped me see that it wasn't personal, at least not really. He wasn't rejecting me. I think he was rejecting the risk. And when you look at it in that way, it's a little heartbreaking. Because how much of life do you miss out when you live like that?
You've said you have no hard feelings about him ever showing up in real life. But do you ever wonder how things might have played out if he had? Do you think you two would have found a way to be real friends despite everything?
Oh, absolutely. I think we would have been great friends. We already were, in a way, just with a screen between us. I think if we had met in real life, there would have been a moment of nervousness, maybe even awkwardness. But then we would have fallen into our usual rhythm, the banter, the teasing, the way we bounced off each other. It was kind of effortless. And I don't think he realizes this. But friendships would have been the least risky thing he could have done. He was so afraid of the possibility of getting hurt, of something not working out. But friendships, the good ones, those are built to withstand uncertainty. And it's a pity, really, because in the end, he didn't avoid pain. He just avoided possibility.
One of the elements of the story is the concept of keeping things blurry to avoid potential pain. Have you ever found yourself doing something similar in your own life? Or do you think you're someone who always embraces clarity, no matter the risk?
I try to embrace clarity, even when it's uncomfortable. I think people deserve honesty, even when it's complicated, even when it stings a little. But I'd be lying if I said I've never left something blurry just to avoid dealing with it. I mean, I think we all do, at least sometimes. But the difference is, I don't have to stay there. I mean, I might hesitate, I might wrestle with it for a while, but eventually, I'd rather know than wonder. That not knowing, it eats away at you.
What do you think he would say if he heard this story? Would he recognize himself in it, or do you think he would rationalize his actions differently?
Oh, he'd recognize himself. He's smart, too smart to pretend he wouldn't see the parallels. But I think he'd try to play it off, make some joke about it, deflect. That's what he does. And maybe in the quiet moments, he'd sit with it. Maybe he'd think about it more than he'd admit. But I doubt he'd say much beyond the surface level. Vulnerability isn't something he wears easily.
And if you could say one last thing to him, not in a text, but face to face, what would it be?
I would say, you didn't have to be perfect. You just had to show up. And I don't mean just for me. I mean for yourself.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. If you've been a returning listener, thank you for spending this time with me again. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of someone in your life, consider sharing it with them. Sometimes, a story has a way of putting feelings into words that we can't quite express ourselves. And if you have a story of your own, one that's been sitting in your heart waiting to be told, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to me at SayOneMoreThingPod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for being part of these conversations. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Can Say One More Thing.